Let's talk about water and climate. The idea is that water flows through ecosystems. On land, plants are the basis of ecosystems. So we kind of have to think about water, ecosystems, and plants all in the same thought. But if we get water flowing through ecosystems by building and growing ecosystems, by managing our land well, then we can quickly, cleanly, and safely cool our climate. So let's talk about that. So this screen is water and climate. Look at the pictures on the left and on the right? Do we want the left or do we want the right? Do we want a land that has ample amounts of water, or do we want land that is virtually a desert? Clearly, we want more water, and not just water in the pond, but water flowing through water cycles, such as rain. If we want more rain, we need to have more vegetation on the land, because that vegetation in so many ways is the key to getting the rain to fall. We have a livable planet because we have a living planet. Life creates the conditions for life. The climate conversation today has been captured by those who have an almost completely physical, as opposed to biological, almost completely physical understanding of what creates our climate. Some of us are saying, hey, wait, let's talk about this. Let's think about this. Biological systems, living systems, have a central, pivotal, foundational role to play in our climate. So, the introduction to this talk: we can quickly, cleanly, and safely cool our climate if we restore vegetation and the water cycles that flow through ecosystems. The sun and the rain will do most of the work if we act as a keystone species and set the stage for nature to succeed. We have to do some work, but the sun and the rain will do most of the work, but we have to set the stage for nature to succeed. And item number 3, doing all of this requires land management. The good thing is that if you're a homeowner, you have some land to manage. And if you're not a homeowner, your community has land to manage in the form of parks, forests, community gardens, and the like. We're talking about water. Number 1, water cools our climate. Water regulates our temperatures. It doesn't just cool the temperatures, but it provides a buffer so that things don't get too hot or too cold. A desert, on the other hand, is very hot in the day and somewhat cold at night, but a comparable piece of land that has vegetation on it will be able to keep the hot from getting too hot and the cold from getting too cold. Number 3, water moves through living systems. If we want to employ the benefits of water, it will be in the process of flowing through living systems, such as plants. Item number 4, water resides in plants. And item number 5, we can cool our climate quickly, cleanly, and safely if we will restore our living systems. Why focus on living systems to address climate change? Because water has a dramatic cooling effect. Let's talk about that for just a minute. Let's talk about the cooling effect of water. So if you step out of the shower or the bath or the pool, then water is evaporating and it feels cold. It feels cold because it takes so much heat energy to make that water evaporate. We want to employ that phenomenon to cool our temperatures. We only have to cool our temperatures by about 1%. I don't want to digress too much into that, but real briefly, the greenhouse effect is such that there's only about a 1% excess of incoming heat versus outgoing heat. If we close that gap and we close the gap between incoming heat and outgoing heat, then we will eliminate the greenhouse effect. You would think that eliminating the greenhouse effect would be of great interest to the people who want to change our entire economy. We need to change our economy, but merely changing our energy system, as if changing our energy system is going to close that gap between the 1%, as if, we have water which has a tremendous capacity to cool, but we're not going to talk about that. We're just going to talk about carbon dioxide, as if carbon dioxide is a thermostat, as if lowering carbon dioxide, which takes decades, if not centuries, and can never occur in the context of a growing economy, but as if lowering carbon dioxide is the key to cooling the climate, as if, maybe we need to do something else to control the fever other than these extremely indirect and roundabout strategies, which nobody really has a plan for anyway. But I digress. But I wanted to talk about the cooling effect of water. So when you step out of the shower, the bath, or the pool, you need a towel because it's cold. And it's cold because water is evaporating. If your skin weren't wet, you wouldn't feel cold. So you dry off and it doesn't feel cold anymore because that evaporating water has the power to make you feel cold. It's the same thing when we sweat. Horses sweat, women glow, men perspire. That's sexist, but it's from the old days. They used to say horses sweat, men perspire, women glow. But anyway, perspiration or sweat is the reason we sweat is that evaporating water. Sweat is water. The evaporating water greatly cools our skin, and it's the same thing with plants. So here's what I was getting to: plants transpire. People perspire. Plants transpire. So plants are transpiring all this water, and as a result, it feels cool in their surroundings. When you walk into a forest or under a shade tree, it feels cool, partly because of the shade, but partly because of the evaporating, transpiring water. The average tree, according to the U.S. Forest Service, has transpires about 11,000 gallons of water per year. That's about 40 or 50 gallons per day during the growing season. And that's a good thing because it cools the surroundings. So we could have that cooling effect if we had vegetation on the land. And that's the reason why the middle of the Amazon rainforest is going to be much cooler than the Sahara Desert. They're both on the equator, but the Amazon rainforest is going to be much cooler than the Sahara Desert because in the Sahara Desert, that sun is shining directly on the sand. It's a hot surface. It's hot because sun is shining on it and because there's no vegetation. Whereas in the Amazon rainforest, it has vegetation. The sun is shining on it, but it has vegetation, and the vegetation provides shade and transpiring water. We want that. Why would we not take advantage of that? Let's go to the next slide. Why focus on living systems to address climate change? Because living systems have a dramatic cooling effect because of the shade, because of the transpiration. Number two, living systems, newsflash, living systems store carbon. Living things like plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, they're mostly water. They have more water than anything else, but the second in the list is carbon, and then nitrogen is pretty high up there too. But you and I, if we dried us out, we would be mostly carbon. As long as that living system is growing and thriving and becoming biologically diverse, then it is absorbing carbon. We're taught that, okay, trees and plants absorb carbon because there's photosynthesis, and photosynthesis takes carbon out of the atmosphere, takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, turns it into living tissues, many of which are sugars and other complex organic molecules, but it is not just plants that take carbon out of the atmosphere. It is the living systems or the ecosystems in which plants live that takes the carbon out of the atmosphere on a semi-permanent basis, as long as that ecosystem is growing. As long as the ecosystem is growing, then water is flowing or carbon is flowing out of the atmosphere into the living tissues of the plants, the animals, the fungi, the bacteria, etc. And it's the same thing with carbon. Carbon and water, as long as that living system is growing, then that living system is going to capture water. And I'm going into all this because this is how water becomes a coolant and a regulator. Item number 3, if you have these living systems on the surface of the land, then there's less flooding because the rain falls and the plants and the biologically rich soil is going to absorb water and therefore reduce flooding, because flooding is not about rain. Flooding is about runoff. It doesn't become a flood until it runs off of the land where it falls. Item number 4, there's less drought because living systems and plants and the living soil absorb the rainfall, so that if there's a few weeks or months or years of below average rainfall, the plants can continue to thrive and grow. And it's like, who cares if there's less rain, as long as the plants and the soil have absorbed that rainfall. Item number 5, if we have living systems, then we have less wildfire. We have wildfire primarily because our forests are degraded, and even our brushy scrublands are degraded. Show me an out of control wildfire and I will show you a place that is degraded, because all of our forests are degraded. If we let the forest grow and become biologically diverse, and then they will be in a position to absorb the rainfall. So if we have living systems, then we will have less wildfire. And item number 6, the fringe benefit of all this, apart from the cooling effect of the living systems and the vegetation, we will have clean water and we will have habitat for both people and animals. So we're talking about water, why we need water and vegetation and plants and living systems to cool our climate. We hear about climate change. We hear about climate change is this whole big thing, and it is, but it is greatly misunderstood. Let's talk about the greenhouse effect. Because the better part of climate change is the greenhouse effect. At least that's kind of the oversimplified story that we're told. Number 1, climate change is caused by greenhouse gases, but it's also caused by, number 2, hot surfaces. Look at the photos on the left here. You have a desert on the top and a rainy, vegetation-covered area on the bottom. Which one is going to be hotter when the sun shines? The one on top, the desert, the hot surfaces that are hot because they lack vegetation. What we want is closer to what's on the bottom, which is more vegetation on the land, which is item number 3. These are the factors of climate change. You want plant cover, and we can control that. Item number 4, water as a greenhouse gas. So items number 1 and 4 are greenhouse gases. Item number 1, the greenhouse gases that we're told about are carbon dioxide and methane. There are others, but those are the ones we hear about, especially carbon dioxide. What we don't hear about is water is a greenhouse gas. Most of the warming effect of the sun, insofar as it's caused by greenhouse gases, most of that warming effect of the sun is because water. And we can talk about why that water is up there. It's partly because we have a warmer atmosphere, but it's partly because that water is being held in place by tiny particles of dust and pollution. And if we wanted less of that water to be up there and more of it to be engaged in water cycles, including rain, then what we would do is have more vegetation on the land, including forests, but also, when we think of a forest, that's trees. In our grasslands, we're going to have less trees, but a healthy grassland is still going to have grass and forbs, herbaceous perennials, and some woody, per, some woody plants. But we want the grassland to be a functioning ecosystem. We don't want the grassland to be cleared of its vegetation. We've done that in the American West. We've cleared our grasslands of their vegetation. And the result of that is that you don't have as much. The result of that is that the water that's up there suspended is not being engaged in the water cycles. So how plants cool the planet. The purpose of this slide, I want you to look up on YouTube a video that is entitled How Plants Cool the Planet, or also it's the same video has two different titles, How Plants Cool the Planet or How Plants Could Save Us. So look that up. It's 5 minutes. If you don't do it, it's the best 5 minutes you can spend to understand how plants cool the planet and how plants can save the climate and also provide so many other benefits, including habitat and clean water. So how plants cool the planet, item number one, I say here, greenhouse. I'm getting stuck because it's been a while since I've looked at this slide. Let me go on to the next slide because most of these items I have covered elsewhere, but do look up How Plants Cool the Planet on YouTube. Now, let's talk about the greenhouse effect. We've talked about greenhouse gases, which means carbon dioxide and also methane. Methane and carbon dioxide are the only two greenhouse gases we ever hear about, but we also have water as a greenhouse gas. But insofar as greenhouse gases create a greenhouse effect, it's because there's more incoming heat than outgoing heat. So the problem is that we have more incoming heat than outgoing heat, and the incoming heat is 342 watts per square meter on average worldwide. Some places it's much more than 342 watts per square meter, and some places it's less than that. But we have 342 watts per square meter coming in. We have 339 watts per square meter going out. Sometimes it goes out because it's reflected by clouds or reflected by white surfaces, etc. But sometimes it's going out because we have the water that's engaged in these water cycles, and the water will evaporate, and then up there it will condense and become clouds, because the clouds are not water vapor. The clouds are liquid water. When it goes from water vapor into liquid water, then a little bit of that heat energy radiates back out into space, and that's a reason why we have as much outgoing heat as we do. So we want these water cycles to, I keep doing this body language, this sign language to represent, we want water to be cycling. We don't want water to be stuck up there in the atmosphere. And the way to do that is to have more vegetation on the land. And if we do have more vegetation on the land, then we will have more condensation nuclei. Think of a glass of ice water if you let the glass of ice water sit there for a while, then the water droplets will bead up on the glass. The reason for that is that there is water vapor in the air. All the air that we're breathing, all the air everywhere has some water vapor in it. But it can't condense into water droplets unless it is attached to something solid, such as your glass. The glass is solid. Your glass of ice water is a solid object which the water needs in order to condense. So your glass of ice water is not up there in the sky where the water is condensing. So how is it condensing? What solid objects are up there in the sky for water to condense on? And the answer is items 1, 2, 3, and 4 here. Item number 1 is salt. Salt, comes up out of the ocean, and a little bit of salt is something that the water can condense on. Also, water can condense on ice crystals. That's why we, have sleet and snow and hail are examples of water condensing onto a solid object, and then it freezes. And then item number 3, here's the big news. 3 and 4, bacteria and organic compounds. This is why we want vegetation to occur. This is why we want vegetation on the land. We've cleared 2/3 of the forests in the last 10,000 years or so. And we want that forest area to come back because the trees, like all plants, they emit bacteria and they emit item number 4, the organic compounds. And so vegetation has the bacteria and the organic compounds that cause the condensation. And when you have that condensation, you have to have condensation to have clouds. You have to have clouds to have rain. The less condensation you have, the less you're going to have clouds. The more condensation you have, the more you're going to have clouds, and therefore the more you're going to have rain. So the call to action here is to have more vegetation on the land. The rain and the sun will do most of the work, but we need to manage and protect our land. And what that looks like exactly it varies with where you are, whether it's your lawn, whether it's a desert region, whether it's a forest. But we have a gazillion ways in which we can manage and protect our land. It doesn't always involve planting trees. Planting trees is 1/3 legitimate, 1/3 greenwashing, and 1/3 a waste of time because it's done wrong. We don't need to plant trees so much as we need to let trees plant themselves and thereby grow from there. Let me see how much time we've got here. We've got plenty of time. Okay, so let's talk about what does a forest do for our water cycles. Let's click to another view, have a little change pace here. What does a forest do for our water cycles? Four main aspects or stages of the water cycles are evaporation, condensation, cloud formation, precipitation. A forest causes water to evaporate. I said a little bit earlier that a single tree will transpire about 11,000 gallons per year on average. That's about 40 gallons per day during the growing season. And it causes that evaporation to occur. Most of the rain that falls on land occurs because water is evaporating, not from bodies of water such as lakes and rivers and oceans. Most of the rain that falls on land occurs because it's evaporating from plants and trees. So the more plants and trees you have, the more evaporation you have. The more evaporation you have, item number 2, you have more condensation. Item number 3, you have more cloud formation. And item number 4, you have precipitation. So more evaporation leads to condensation. A cloud, by definition, is condensed water, and that so you have cloud formation. Item number 4, precipitation. It occurs now. The forest or the vegetation, the plant cover on the ground, does not cause the precipitation, but it allows for the precipitation. Because just because a raindrop falls from the cloud does not mean it reaches the ground. Sometimes the raindrop will evaporate before it reaches the ground because the air is hot and dry. A forest or any type of plants or vegetation tends to create a cooler, moister environment in which the raindrop can reach the ground because it's not evaporating. So those are the 4 ways in which a forest engages directly with the water cycle. But what does a forest become as part of the water cycles? Number 1, it becomes a sponge because, compare compare a forest with a clear cut. You can take a forest and you can cut down the whole thing in a day if you want, and then what do you have? You have the soil being degraded, etc. But the forest is going to be a sponge. The clear cut is going to be not so. The clear cut is going to be is not going to be a sponge. You want that sponge. When I see an area that could have plants and it doesn't have plants, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, when the rain falls, it's not going to be absorbed unless it has really good soil. And usually when you remove the vegetation, it's not going to be it's not going to be good soil because vegetation, more than anything else, increase the quality of soil. That's another conversation. We may get to that. But item number 2, a forest becomes a heat bank. This means it's slow to cool up, slow to warm up, slow to cool down. So a forest is going to be not so hot in the day, not so cold at night, not so hot in the summer, not so cold in the winter. That's why, the Amazon rainforest, even though it's on the equator, is not going to be super hot. It might even be in the 70s or the low 80s Fahrenheit. So it's a heat bank. Number 3, a forest is a cooler because of all that transpiration. Because when the water evaporates, it cools its surroundings, just the way when you perspire, your sweat makes you cool. And when trees transpire, it makes the leaves of the trees cool, but it also makes the surrounding area cool because there's just so much water being transpired. Number 4, a forest becomes a humidifier. That keeps the soil from drying out, and you want the forest is adapted to be a humid environment. You want it there. You don't want to cut down the forest because that takes away the humidity in a way that's not helpful. Number 5, a forest is a canopy. Canopy means umbrella. It simply means it is shielding out the sun. It is protecting the ground from the hot rays of the sun, and in 2 ways. One, it's protecting it from the ultraviolet radiation, which kills the bacteria and the life in the soil if there's too much direct exposure. And number 2, it's the canopy protects the soil from the direct heat of the sun. Number 6, the forest becomes a windbreak. You want that the trees of the forest to slow down the wind so that the wind is not too fast and not too persistent, so that it retains some of its water. Number 7, and one thing I did not put on here is filter. I'll see if I can remember that. Number 7, the forest is a biotic pump. This simply means that when water condenses, it creates a vacuum. That vacuum sucks in air from elsewhere. Number 8, and it sucks in air and it keeps the process going. This is the reason the Amazon rainforest some of the heaviest rain in the world is hundreds of miles, if not 1,000 miles or more from the ocean. It's not getting all that rain because it's close to the ocean, because it's not. And the Congo rainforest is in the heart of the African continent. It's not getting all that rain because it is close to the ocean, because it's not. It is getting all that rain because it's a forest that creates a pump that draws in moist air toward the forest, and it condenses, the rain falls, and then it evaporates again, condenses and falls and repeats and creates a pump. And the item number 8, it creates a habitat. This forest is a habitat. What does a forest become in our water cycles? It's a habitat, partly because the plants provide food, shelter, and nesting materials for the living things, but also partly because all those living things need water. Bacteria, fungi, plants all need water. So the forest becomes a place where those living things can get water. I have a hummingbird. I watch hummingbirds. I know that I have hummingbirds in my home landscape. I know that I'm a mile and a half from the closest source of water. Those hummingbirds are not flying a mile and a half to the Ohio River to get their water. They're getting water from the nectar that they suck out of my plants. And when you see insects hanging out on plants, I've never confirmed this or had a scientist tell me this. I just surmise and deduce that one thing that insect is getting on that plant is water. So the forest and the wildflowers are a source of water. And lastly, this forest here is a source, is a filter that cleans the water, but it's also, the streams, because this forest is a sponge, it releases water gently, gradually into the streams, and therefore it becomes a source of water for people to enjoy. And we not only like water, but we need water, and this forest will provide water for the people downstream. Now, we're 32 minutes into this. Let's talk about drylands and desertification. And the reason to talk about drylands and desertification is that that's most of the world. Most of the world, I'm in the eastern U.S. Most of the world, I'm in the eastern U.S. It's a relatively wet area. It's very forgiving. Most of the world is not like that. Less than a third of the world has this consistent rainfall throughout the year. Most of the world has dry lands, and a dry land is defined as an area that doesn't have very much rain, or it has a long dry season. So, parts every continent has drylands. North America, South America, Africa, Asia, Australia, every continent has drylands. And and dry doesn't mean desert. Drylands, if you have enough vegetation, then your dryland is not going to be a desert. Sadly, most of our drylands are rapidly becoming deserts. And the exact numbers escape me, but it's something like, something like half to 2/3 of the land in the world is dry, and something like, a third of it is rapidly desertifying. This is a serious problem, so let's talk about it. And the reason, this slide is out of place. Let's go to dry lands have a rainy season and a dry season. So the rainy, there might have one rainy season per year. They might have two rainy seasons per year, but in any event, they either have one or two long dry seasons, and there needs to be a way of capturing the rainfall. So that's item number 2. We want to capture the rainfall, and I'm going to expand this a little bit. We want to capture the rainfall And the ways to capture rainfall are soil and plants and animals and fungi and check dams. Mainly, good soil will capture the rainfall, but the only way you can have good soil is plants. Ray the soil guy, Archuleta, one of the main evangelists for healthy soil, especially in the United States, but also worldwide. Ray the soil guy, Archuleta, says that soil and plants are one. They're one system. And so you need plants for healthy soil, and you need soil for healthy plants. You need good soil for healthy plants. So we capture the rainfall. The primary strategy for capturing rainfall should be to have as much soil and plants on the land. And that doesn't mean planting trees, because remember, planting trees, take all the tree planting projects in the world, a third of them are legitimate, a third of them are failed, are doomed to failure because they're done wrong, and a third of them are greenwashing. But so you capture rainfall with soil and plants, you capture rainfall with animals and fungi. We'll talk about, how beavers and earthworms and prairie dogs and even cattle can serve to be to condition the soil to capture the rainfall. And any soil worthy of the name is going to have fungi in it. And this is which is another way of saying that soil and plants and living systems, including fungi, including bacteria, are going to capture the rainfall. So that's what we need to do. And item number 3, check dams of various types. I put check dams in there not because it's the first thing you think of, but because it's something that is needed in some places. But we want if we want to restore our land to capture the rainfall at any scale, then we want to focus on soil and plants and animals and fungi and living systems. And then after we've done that, maybe we need some check dams. There are some good people who might disagree with me on that. I'm obviously generalizing at the risk of overgeneralizing. I'm just saying that check dams are not the first thing that you think about. So item number 3, how does this occur? I'm generalizing. How does this occur? It occurs in the context of agriculture or forestry or wildlife management. We need to change how we do agriculture if we're going to be able to capture the rainfall at any scale. And we need to change how we do forestry if we're going to capture the rainfall at any scale. And we need to change how we do wildlife management if we're going to capture rainfall at any scale. For example, wildlife management needs to include livestock. Livestock are an important part of the strategy for, if cattle are properly managed, then that cattle farm, that ranch becomes a wildlife habitat. I'm talking Will Harris, I'm talking Joel Salatin, I'm talking Gabe Brown, all of these farmers, and I'm talking Alejandro Carrillo, all of these farmers and ranchers, their farms and ranches become habitat for wildlife. And so wildlife management and ranching need not be and should not be and cannot be two entirely different things. And the last thing I'll say in the context of dry lands is that we need to think about urban planning. This is where check dams come into play, where you might not have a whole lot of room to improve you can improve your soil, but in an urban context where there's pavement and concrete, you don't have a lot of area of soil and plant matter to work with. So you need to utilize other strategies, including check dams and swales and things that slow down the flow of water so that it'll soak into the ground where it is, reduce flooding and reduce drought, because drought is not so much an absence of rainfall. Drought is the fact that when it did rain, it did not soak into the ground. Which brings me to this point: effective rainfall. It's not the rain you get, it's the rain you keep. Item number 2, Gabe Brown in 2009 at Brown's Ranch in North Dakota. Now, North Dakota gets about less than 50, not much more than 15 inches of rain on a given year. Well, Gabe Brown's farm got 12 inches of rain in less than a day, over a foot of rain, actually 13 and a half inches of rain in less than 24 hours, over a foot of rain in less than a day. How do you deal with all that? Well, Gabe had been improving his soil for a couple of decades, and his soil was so good that it all soaked into the ground. This is why I say flooding is not about rainfall, it's about runoff. It's not a flood until it starts to run off. So you want to have rainfall that is, you want to have soil and plants and trees that are able to soak up the rain. You want that land to be a sponge. If the land is a sponge, then this prevents both flooding and drought. Item number 3, reduce flooding. Item number 4, reduce drought. And so I've been talking about animals. I've been talking about how to soak up the rainfall so that, because there's so many benefits to soaking up the rainfall. One of the main things that is wrong in the world is when it rains, it floods. It floods because the soil and the plants are not capable of capturing the rainfall. So we want living systems to capture the rainfall, and this means, I say living systems, I'm not talking only about plants, I'm also talking about animals. So prairie dogs, beavers, earthworms, cattle are all, I was going to say they're tools, but they're agents. They are engineers. So let's talk about, they're engineers that make the soil so that when it rains, it captures the rainfall. So how to increase the ratio of plants to bare dirt? We want to increase the ratio of plants to bare dirt because that's how we capture the rainfall. So prairie dogs are gone from 90%, 95%, or maybe even more, 97, 99%, something like that, of their original range. Well, the thing is, prairie dogs, they live in colonies called towns. There are millions, if not a billion or more, prairie dogs used to be, back in the day, there could be a billion or more prairie dogs in a single town, prairie dog town. And they dig holes. And when it rains, some of the rain goes into those holes. It doesn't run off as much. Not as much of it evaporates, not as much of it runs off. So we want prairie dogs to dig their holes so that they capture the rainfall. Prairie dogs are considered a pest, but we need to count the cost of eradicating prairie dogs. And in like manner, we need to count the cost of eradicating beavers. There used to be 350 million beavers on the North American continent. They went down to about 5 million, and now they're back up to about 10 million. We need beavers to build ponds. It used to be, I heard this from one source, Joel Salatin, who said that the North American continent used to be 8% freshwater by surface area, and that was largely because of beaver ponds. It went from 8% down to 1% because you kill the beavers for pelts, and sometimes you kill the beavers because they're taking up your land. Um, and then, uh, so anyway, we need to coexist with these animals because there's so many benefits to it. You know, we've allowed everything to be taken over by a few people who are only very narrowly focused on some very short-term goals, selfish goals, narrow goals, short-term goals, instead of creating a world that works for all of us, including the wildlife that could live among us. Let me say one more thing about, let me click out of this. I'm going to say one more thing about animals, and that is, well, what do you know? I forgot my train of thought. Um, we could have a world that is where we coexist with animals, and Uh, we can do that for multiple reasons. One is, as humans, we could do it for selfish reasons because a world with wildlife. Now, here's what I wanted to say: a world with wildlife is a much more pleasant place for us to be. And don't you hate it? Uh, what was I going to say? Anyway, I guess I'm getting a little bit tired. But okay, here's what I wanted to say. Climate change has become the only thing that environmentalists are willing to talk about. It's become the environmental movement has been hijacked by people who just want to talk about carbon dioxide and nothing else. And that's sad because if you go back 50 years, the environmental movement was concerned about saving forests and saving wildlife. We need to get back to that because if you look at a graph of if you look at a graph of insects, they're plummeting to the ground. If you look at a graph of wild mammals, they're plummeting to the ground. If you look at a graph of wild birds, they're plummeting to the ground. And you know, this is a problem for so many reasons, and we need to know that that a big part of the solution to that is to get our heads out of our backsides and understand that we have a living system. The biosphere is a living system. It's not all about carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is not the be all and the end all. We have fetishized carbon dioxide, and we need to understand that there's more to protecting our planet than just being hyper obsessed with carbon dioxide. For one thing, it's just that whole conversation is being governed by people who just want profit, power, and control, and it has nothing to do with conservation or with creating a world that is pleasant and works for everybody, including others, including our fellow species. So that's about all I have today. Thank you so much for joining me. Come back soon.